joyful play,
purposeful work,
rugged outdoor living,
our camps and conservation efforts,
teach timeless skills,
and kindle the spirit within.
Farm and Wilderness.
Farm and Wilderness.
Farm and Wilderness. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Farm and Wilderness podcast. My name is W, one of the camp directors here at Farm and Wilderness, and I'm the host of this limited spring series. If you're already part of F&W, welcome. If you're new to Farm and Wilderness, also welcome. We are a community of 7 camps located in Plymouth, Vermont, about 15 minutes south of ski heaven Killington, and serve campers aged 4 to 17 across a wide variety of camps. Farm and Wilderness was started in 1939 by Ken and Susan Webb, and our very first camp was Timberlake. And over the years, we've added a bunch of other programs and camps, which we'll be exploring over the course of this podcast. You can check out our website at farmandwilderness.org. We're also on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and now this podcast, so be sure to subscribe. My last episode about Flying Cloud, I went a bit deeper into who we at Farm and Wilderness are. So if you want to know more, I encourage you to check out that episode. Now, I have a confession. I had plans for this episode to feature audio stories from our ice cutting event last weekend. And side note, it was a great event. We got a ton of ice out of the lake. I had so many bowls of chili and was sore for days after. It seemed like folks had a really great time. I know Therapy Dog Atlas had a great time. It was just a great event. So if you can come next year, please make sure you do. However, I didn't want to wait to get this particular interview we're going to hear today out. Partially because I have upped our audio game a little bit. I've really been learning how to make the audio software work a bit better for me and had an incredible innovation. A 2-microphone setup. Who would have guessed it was such a game changer? I'm learning so much about everything audio. Now, about today's show. This next camp is more of the wilderness in Farm and Wilderness, and they do it with such a sense of joy and wonder that is insanely impressive. Saltash Mountain Camp, or SAM Camp, serves campers of all genders ages 11 to 14 in a community of about 50 campers and about 20 staff. It's one of our medium-sized camps and has this really unique combination of sending kids out on trips and having them perform in skits. The story of SAM Camp starts in 1960. F&W founders Ken and Susan Webb were looking around to find new property for their next camp. At the time, Timberlake and Indian Brook, now known as Firefly Song, were over capacity, and they were really looking to start a camp that was more on the medium-sized side. They acquired land in Mount Holly around Lake Nineveh and turned to Jack and Ruth Hunter to run the first summer of SAM Camp in 1962. Now, for a bit of context, this was a few years before Flying Cloud would open in 1964, and so SAM Camp was originally an all-boys camp that had an emphasis on hiking and forestry. Those campers would often help farmers in the area with haying, and each cabin cooked breakfast and dinner at their own cabin, and they would all come together for lunch. Now, eventually, the campers wanted more than the hiking and the aquatics and the canoeing and forestry and natural science and ecology. They also wanted to grow their own food, which is such an F&W thing. The camp was open to all genders in 1973 when Jack Hunter moved on to be the first executive director of the then newly formed Farm and Wilderness Foundation. Now, as a side note, I feel like I could do a whole episode on Jack Hunter. Jack was a pretty pivotal and foundational figure in our history. Again, he was SAM Camp director, an executive director. And later in life, he was really our repository, our resident historian of all things Farm and Wilderness. He passed a few years back, and his family is still involved in the camps. I just want to really lift up how important Jack and Ruth Hunter were to the Farm and Wilderness story. Now, trips have been an important part of the SAM Camp ethos for a while now, and in fact, during the war years, there was no gas for extra use to drive kids to their drop-off points or drive out to pick them up. So they would put campers with all of their camping gear and their trips food, everything, on public buses and trains. And I can't really imagine that. If you've ever been around a group of campers at the end of their trip, and they're usually pretty tired, they're usually a little smelly, they're definitely hungry. I just can't imagine being that on the train or the bus. Well, actually, I can't. I lived in New York for a while. Don't worry, we don't send kids on public buses or trains anymore to get them to their trips. SAM Camp's focus on skits has also been an important part for that community. We have this big event at the end of every summer called Fair, And it's where all the camps come together, alumni and families come out. We have people-powered machines, we have food, we have a square dance, we usually have a big bonfire. And part of the lore around that is that you can't say the word fair until Sam Camp says it at their opening skit. And that skit is usually kind of a parody. The other camps are featured. And at the very end, they will say that word to start the day. You'll hear me talk about this in the interview, but I can't stress enough how joyous this particular farm and wilderness community is. And for anyone who's considering F&W for the first time, you might be usually looking at Timberlake and Firefly Song, but I really encourage listeners to consider Saltash Mountain if their camper is old enough. Sam Camp has an incredibly warm and inviting community that's a little bit on the smaller side and really sets campers up to push themselves in this unique combination of trips and skits. I'm also excited to use this episode to introduce Adair, our newest Farm and Wilderness Camp Director and new director of Sam Camp. Adair is an artist. She's a musician and a visual artist and spent years in theater, musical plays, even improv groups and stand-up comedy. Camp has been a big part of her life ever since she went to her first overnight camp at the age of 4, and she's done many outdoor adventures, even meeting her partner on the trail when both he and her found themselves in the same hostel. It's a pretty great meet cute for the director of our tripping camp. You'll hear Adair talk all about what makes Sam Camp great, what she's excited about, and her thoughts on the future. I also hope you'll understand why I couldn't wait to get this episode out. And now, my conversation with Adair. All right, so welcome everyone to the podcast again. I am so excited to be continuing this series of talking to directors. And you've already heard a little bit about her so far, but I want to welcome Adair to our podcast. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to do this. Again, this is a new venture for us at Farm and Wilderness. And so we shall see how it goes. And so, like our previous interviews, we're going to start with you. So Adair, how did you end up at this wonderfully weird place called Farm and Wilderness?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I've been a camp person for pretty much as long as I can remember. I went to summer camp for the first time when I was 4, and it was just really formative throughout my childhood and adolescent years. And, when I was in high school, I did some of those like short-term camp counselor situations and just really loved it and found so much joy in connecting with kids and running activities, even as a very young person. And when I was 19, I took on my first full summer camp counselor role, leading hikes and music at another camp in Vermont. And it was such a meaningful experience to me that I actually transferred from my small liberal arts college in Ohio, where I had been studying French and English, and moved out to Oregon so that I could attend the University of Oregon and go through their outdoor leadership program and also major in environmental studies, which my previous school didn't offer. After college, I taught preschool for a year and I got to learn from other teachers and moms, just way more in depth about how to care for and connect with and educate kids. Then I took a journey of my own and I hiked about 400 miles of the AT solo and then met my husband. And then we did about 200 more together. And in future years, among our other adventures, we went back and finished that southern half. And then eventually camp life called me back and I ended up coming back to Vermont to be a climbing program director, and ended up staying on in a year-round role where I got to see all the backstage stuff that makes camp happen and hire staff members and plan a program and order supplies and make sure we have enough balloons and all that kind of thing. And found that, wow, this is really what I want to focus my energy on professionally for a long time. And back that summer when I was 19, I had thought to myself, wow, someday I really want to be a camp director. And it just started to feel like the time. When I was choosing my next place where we wanted to land, my family and I were really intentional about what it was we were looking for. And the thing that came top of mind more than anything else was our values. And we wrote them down on a piece of paper and talked about it at length throughout all of last summer. And when an old mentor of mine kind of just reappeared out of the woodwork and came back into my life. And he was like, you should really check out Farm and Wilderness. That seems like a good place for you. And when we started to learn about this organization and everything that it stands for and believes in and works toward, we were like, these are the values on our little piece of paper. This is exactly what we were hoping to find. So long story short, that's what brought me here to this point.
I love that. And I love hearing people's origin stories generally at Farm and Wilderness. And I think there's something really interesting about director origin stories, because myself and you and Elliot in the last podcast and others have really talked about someone like brought us in, right? That there was a connector there, which I think is just so amazing and like a really interesting tidbit of like how profoundly connected this community is for Farm and Wilderness, because we're a big community. But I would be remiss if I don't go back to a slightly part of your story. I've heard you give this talk a couple times, but I want to go back to meeting your partner on the AT, right? For a second. So you talked about you hiked 400 miles. I'm not sure I've hiked 400 miles my entire life. And so that is amazing. So I'm sorry, I have to indulge slightly. Could you tell a little bit more about this meet cute on the AT trail? Because again, you are taking over the tripping camp. So the fact that this is part of your origin story is pretty great.
Yes, it was definitely a meet cute, except that we were both like dirtier and stinkier than we've ever been in our entire lives when we met each other. And that part was not cute, but the rest of it definitely was. So yeah, it was kind of a miracle that we ran into each other. Actually, I was hiking south and he was hiking north. Basically, we were both running from the same thunderstorm. I had just a hellish day on the trail, and I didn't know that he was having a hellish day on his part of the trail. I mean, I was only supposed to hike about 18 miles that day, but like the shelter that I was supposed to stay at was closed to bear activities. I ran into 4 bears just that day. I had seen maybe 3 the rest of the time I'd been hiking. I almost stepped on a rattlesnake. I ran out of water at like 10 a.m. Like it was just like everything that can go wrong on the trail went wrong. And so when I got about 4 miles past the 18-mile mark where I thought I was going to sleep that night, and I was at a road crossing and I was like, you know what? I need to go sleep inside and charge my cell phone and get some water. This is becoming unsafe. And so I started flipping through my guidebook and calling every number of like every hostel nearby, and nobody picked up the phone. And I was like, what am I going to do? And so then I came up on this beautiful lake. And my thought was, okay, there's going to be a public bathroom there. I can at least fill my water bottle, charge my cell phone. And when I came out of the woods and onto the beach, there was one woman loading up a kayak into her car. And in my head, I was like, I'm going to go get in her car, as hikers often think this way. And so I went up and started a conversation with her, and she was really nice. We just started talking. And, after a couple minutes, I was like, hey, I've had a really rough day outside. Do you know of anywhere that I can go nearby to sleep? Could you give me a ride? And she was like, it is crazy that you ask that, because 10 minutes before you came out of the woods, this guy came back to the beach because he'd forgotten his dog's leash. And we started talking, and he told me that 2 weeks ago, he opened up a hiker hostel a mile away. And would I please bring him tired, hungry hikers? And I was like, well, it's me. I'm the tired, hungry hiker. So please take me there. And she did. And it was literally just a mile away from where I was. This awesome hostel called Boots Off. You should absolutely check it out. He had opened just 2 weeks before. And the owner, who's now a dear friend of ours, was just this very gregarious, friendly man. And he was giving me a tour all over and talking about his grand plans. And he was like, yeah, I'm just really hoping that somebody's going to roll through who'll do a work trade for me to do some murals and paint some signage. And just really hoping an artist is going to show up. And I was like, well, about a week ago, I was at a hostel and said out loud that I would really love to paint some murals if some business owner would just give me some paint and a wall. So we worked out a thing where I was gonna, stay for a little bit and do some art for him, which ended up being an incredible experience for me. And as we were just sitting on the porch, eating dinner, and I was coming down from my day and had showered and everything, he got a call on his cell phone from a lost hiker. And a couple hours later, my future husband stumbled in from the opposite direction. And Jim, the owner, was doing the same grand tour and grand plans and everything. And he's like, yeah, health inspector wise, I really got to get an outdoor shower built. I want it to be something like special and interesting. And my husband, who's a carpenter, was like, I've really been wanting to do a timber frame project. I've already got an idea. It would be really simple. We could use materials on the property. And so then he ended up staying to do a work stay too. And we started hiking together on weekends and, hanging out, helping each other with our projects. And the rest is history.
That is amazing. And so many moments of the universe providing in that, which I think is really great. And again, like you were leading a tripping camp. And so with that kind of background, let's turn to talk about Sam and this kind of amazing place. And as our listeners heard at the top, Farm Wilderness is a collection, a community of several different camps. And Sam Camp has a very unique place in our group of camps and our kind of programming offers that we have. And so I want to talk about that uniqueness right off the bat, trips and skits. That's a pretty unique mix. If I told, when I go on the road and tell people we do trips and skits, I tend to get slightly confused faces. And so I want to hear directly from you. How does that work at Sam Camp? What is the magic of trips and skits together at Sam Camp?
I'm glad you used the word magic because I think it's a good one. Yes, it is. It is a really interesting confluence of things. And I had that same reaction the first time I heard about it. Mine was a very happy aha moment because I wondered how these two loves of mine could ever come together in such a beautiful way. But the more I dig into the program at Sam, the more sense it really makes to me. One, it's just a beautiful opportunity to use both parts of your brain and your body, to spend half of your camp session essentially doing these very creative, silly things, where you then also get to go sleep in your bed at night. And then to spend half of your time doing this very intense, outdoor adventure, hardcore, learning how strong you are trip. I feel like it's a beautiful balance if you're looking for a summer where you get to have it all. But I actually see a lot of crossover between the two in terms of how it develops us as people to participate in both kinds of activities. So the number one thing that comes to mind for me is courage. It takes a lot of courage to put yourself into the wilderness for any length of time doing something that is going to be challenging and sometimes uncomfortable and has a lot of unknowns. And it also takes a lot of courage to, write something with a group of people, be assured that it's going to be funny and well received and then perform it in front of a different group of people. That's a lot. And I feel like it stretches our growth limits of, how we create and how we work together as a team and how we put ourselves out there and how we believe in ourselves. I think it can really build a firm foundation in that.
I love the through line of courage because we heard that from Elliot on that interview, and we're going to hear it from other directors as well. And when you think about building those moments of courage for kids, right? It sounds like it's, based on your meet cute story and the idea of trips, that it's on the other side of struggle or adversity or challenge. So as you think about preparing kids for trips to find their courage on the trips, based on everything how do you get kids physically, emotionally ready to go on those epic trips that Sam Camp does?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, first of all, it is the privilege of we grown-ups at camp to build the hype and set the tone. And I'm gonna give an example that that maybe seems unrelated, but bear with me here. Long ago, when I was leading day hikes for groups of kids, we would build the hype about every little part of it. And specifically, I'm thinking about carrying our lunch up to the top of the mountain. We would do build your own burritos. That was the go-to meal. And so every kid had to carry a can of corn or a can of beans or a bag of tortillas or cheese or something like that. And we would all then, when we got to the summit of our hike, then we would take a break and build our burritos, etc. Sometimes it's easy for kids who aren't used to carrying a backpack to be like, oh, I don't want to carry this can of beans. Or, you mean I have to carry the empty can with bean water back down the mountain or whatever. And so my co-leaders and I made a game of it. where we came up with like different silly challenges that they would have to do with the different elements of what they were carrying. And what became the favorite, and do not ask me how we came up with this because I don't know. We came up with this game where when we would like drain off the can of beans, we would have a volunteer lay on the ground and another volunteer like try and pour the bean water like from the can up high into their mouths. And again, all volunteers. So no one was forced to go through something like this, but it turned into everyone involved just laughing hysterically and super dirty and just like leaning into, you know, we're walking up a mountain, it's really hot and we're carrying beans. And I think it's that kind of energy that the leaders can bring to the whole experience that makes the dirty, challenging parts really fun and exciting and something that you're actually going to remember fondly forever rather than just have to get through. I think, too, it's really important, you know, on a more serious note, to really validate for kids who are nervous about going on a trip like this that might be outside their comfort zone for 100 different reasons, that what they're feeling isn't crazy, like, you know, that it is a hard thing that they're doing and that it might feel scary for good reasons. And, you know, we have fear in our minds and bodies for good reasons. It helps us stay safe, but that also we can get them excited about moving through those fears and know that they're going to have all the support they need to get through it and still have a good time. And that some of your favorite stories looking back end up being the time when you ran into 4 bears and you almost stepped on a rattlesnake and you were dehydrated for 8 hours and until something awesome happened. You know, it's there's a quote, and I believe it's from Lewis Carroll. I might be misquoting the author here, but no, I'm sorry. It's John Steinbeck. There's a quote from John Steinbeck that is, what good is summertime without the cold of winter to give it sweetness? And I feel like that in particular really applies to trips, that like the hard things that you go through when you're backpacking only make the pure fun sweeter.
Yeah, that type 2 fun, right? That is not necessarily fun in the moment, that, you know, your wet feet or you're tired or whatever, but does make those really great stories. And for families who are listening, our trips rarely have 4 bears, rattlesnakes on them.
That was a strange day.
Yes. But they all do have those moments of tiredness and feet hurt and all of those things. And I think all of us as educators and parents out there want their kids to build that resilience. And I love hearing how excited you are talking about trips. I think that's so great. And like our kids need to hear that. So we talked about courage on trips. Let's talk about courage in the other half of that really unique Sam equation. And we have kids that'll come and really want the physicality of trips. And they get excited about that for Sam, but they might be a bit more nervous on the skit side. So what do you do to prepare kids to be courageous when it comes to the skits part of Sam Camp?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's really important, first of all, to just listen to kids and to believe them and to try and figure out what specifically is making them nervous about it. And, you know, we serve kids who are middle school aged. It's very developmentally normal at that time of your life to be self-conscious about pretty much everything. So it makes total sense to me why someone might not automatically feel super psyched about putting on a silly costume and like doing a weird voice and, you know, just doing something silly in front of a group of strangers. It makes sense. I also know how fun and rewarding it can be to do something like that with a group of your friends. And camp is a really unique place where you get to explore things like that in a really supportive environment. So I think there's a lot of value in stepping out of your comfort zone in that way. We can remind kids when they're nervous about doing something out of their comfort zone like that they're in a supportive place where people are going to validate what they're putting out, that like people are going to laugh because they're coming to a skit to laugh, and that it's okay to make themselves vulnerable that way. And that can be a really powerful growth experience for someone who's nervous about it, to find themselves accepted at the end of it. And that also, it's totally okay to have boundaries about what you do as part of a participant in a skit. If you don't want to be front and center in a crazy costume doing something ridiculous, then you're the one writing the skit. So you can write a role for yourself with your friends and teammates that feels good for you.
I love all that. And, one of the most obvious connectors between trips and skits is how campers process their trips. They do a trip skit, a reflection on what the trip was. And it's that moment to really decide who were they on the trip? How do they translate that to the person they are back at camp? And how do they have a moment to kind of show that off, right? And show off the fun and the silly and the hard moments and all those things. And so on the surface, it is magical and wonderful and courageous. And it's a very intentional way of kids not just finishing trip and saying, great, rolling on. We are going to actually process it, which is some of the secret sauce, I think, of Farm and Wilderness, that we do a lot of things with intentionality in like a really kind of fun, amazing way. Let's go a little bit more into programming. So when you think about Sam Camp and all the things that Sam Camp does, what sort of programming does Sam do really well in comparison to other Farm and Wilderness camps, other camps generally, or just like, what does it do well?
Well, I really love the confluence of creativity and just like absolute wackiness that I've never seen anywhere else and just like absolutely delights me, combined with the like very real hard skills of learning to backpack and, learning wilderness skills like, how to build a fire and how to orient yourself when you're outside.
I love that you brought up the wackiness, because when I think of Sam Camp, it's the joyful wackiness that really separates it from the other Farm Wilderness camps. That I think the other camps will tend to take themselves a bit more seriously, but not in like a bad way that I'm connotating that, right? That like at TL, we really focus on like epicness, and it's fun and it's joyous, but there's like a pure wonder that happens at Sam Camp because of that ability to just let loose and be silly, because y'all are doing the intense trips.
Yeah. Just today, I was talking with one of our program directors from last year and really got a deeper glimpse into some of that like whimsical wackiness and how Sam Camp has always brought that to even things that are usually just very simple and straightforward. So today she was telling me about the camp tours when campers get here. I've worked at a lot of different camps, and it's one of the first things you do everywhere. You need the campers to know where the bathrooms are and where the nurse is and where we eat. And so it's almost always something you do, cabin counselors take the kids around and show them this is the bathroom, this is the nurse, whatever. At Sam Camp, the tradition is called the Magical Mystery Tour. And it's this whole like scavenger hunt with riddle clues, and all the counselors are dressed up in crazy costumes and they have a theme every year. And last year, apparently they like decorated a camp van to look like the Mystery Machine, and it was all Scooby-Doo themed. And that's just for a tour around camp. And there's all this just like thought and sweetness and craziness packed into every simple little thing. And it turns it into a really magical experience.
Oh, that's so great. And I can't help but think that part of what allows that to happen is the makeup of Sam Camp itself, right? You're one of our not necessarily smallest camps, but a little bit more on the smaller side. So you can really kind of see kids there, and it's a mixed gender space, right? And so let's talk about that a little bit. How do you see the idea of kind of middle schoolers in a mixed gender space, which is different from Flying Cloud, Red Spruce Grove, Timberlake, and Firefly Song? How do you see that contributing to what is uniquely magical about Sam Camp?
Totally. So my mentor, who was the one who suggested I check out Farm and Wilderness in general, was an executive director here a long, long time ago. I believe he was in the 1960s or 70s. And he was an integral part of the purchasing process of Sam Camp and determining, with the help of the board and everyone else, what it will be. The mixed gender aspect was something that he really specifically pushed for. He was like, if we're going to do this, we need to provide a mixed gender opportunity for kids who are not yet in high school. And for him, it came back to Quaker values that, if we are teaching how to live in community, well, our communities include many different genders all living together. And we need an opportunity for younger people before they're in high school to experience that if they feel ready for it. I think it's really beautiful. There's obvious value in having, boys just together or girls just together or whatever. But I think there's something really special about all of us being together and working together on our chores and backpacking outside. I think it's I think it's powerful for young people to find their place in a group that isn't necessarily just with people with bodies like theirs.
And so when you think of parents who might be nervous or concerned about this mixed gender aspect of the camp, what do you say to them to assure them that like it's going to be great and it's going to be fine?
One, we have a very robust program that provides lots of stuff to do that I think mitigates some of the other stuff that kids could find on their own to do. Mm-hmm. Two, we have a really awesome camper to staff ratio. And so far this year, we have a really fantastic team of leaders shaping up. So there are all these adult mentors around to guide kids through their experiences of what they're thinking and feeling and seeing and interacting with other campers and helping them to process that in a safe and healthy way. And just eyes on them, making sure that everybody's safe and in a good spot.
Great. That is in camp. What about on the trail?
Yeah. I think it's really powerful for girls and boys and everybody in between to go backpacking together. Just because any sort of physical activity, I feel like we as a society are still working through a lot of gender stereotypes about what it means to participate in those things. And I think the value of going through it together is that boys coming out of that experience are not going to have any part of them that comes out of it thinking that only boys can backpack and hike long miles. Girls coming out of that experience are going to come out of it not with any part of them thinking that they can only do that safely in a group of just females, and I think there's real beauty in seeing kids of all genders supporting each other through a difficult physical challenge.
That's really interesting and something I hadn't actually thought a whole lot about when we think about SAM Camp, because I certainly enjoy when I have social events with Firefly Song, having Firefly campers transparently show my own kiddos up, especially around chopping wood or things like that, because I think it is really amazing and wonderful, just as you said, for kids to see these possibilities and that it is a possibility that can work with their identity. Right. It is not making them any less of blank, right? Whatever they want to put in that. It is simply making them like a stronger human who hopefully is like a better human in the long run. Right. And, hearing you talk about gender just again connects me back to the values of community at Farm and Wilderness, that so much of our work is about learning to live in community with people who may or may not be like you, and see that they are also capable and strong and wonderful and amazing. And the way you all do it is such a great connection to the rest of what Farm Wilderness do, and such like a uniquely magical thing that you all are doing. When families are again thinking about which camp to send their campers to, what type of camper do you think does well at SAM Camp?
From what I understand, our campers are creative and adventurous. And our campers are interested in being part of a community that is supportive and validating. So they're not there to show anybody up. They're not there to act like they're cooler than anybody else. They're there to integrate into a community where it's a safe place for everybody to find who they are, where it's a safe place for people to talk about what they're feeling and experiencing outside of camp, and where it's a safe place to try things that you may or may not be good at the first time you try it. I think it takes a lot of trust to integrate into a community like this. And we're looking for campers who are excited about that kind of challenge and finding a home in that.
Let's go back to trips a little bit, right? We've talked about how to prepare kids to courageously do both trips and skits. But I think there's probably some kids and families who want to know what exactly trips are they going on? So like what types of trips are they going on? How long are they lasting? What are some of the cool places they might go? Say more about the trips.
I'll say what I can about the trips.
Yeah.
So a couple days into camp, once we've had just enough time to orient and settle in, then the kids will go on a trip with just their cabin mates. So the people that they are spending every night and every morning with, they're going to spend 3 solid days together. And it's a hike right out of camp trip. So you never even have to get in a car. You're going to walk right out of SAM Camp and onto any number of Farm and Wilderness's beautiful 5,000 protected acres and do an adventure real close to home. And this is a great opportunity to get to know your cabin mates, get to know your gear, get to know your own body, and get to know kind of just a little taste of the pace of life out on the trail backpacking. Then we'll have several days in camp that are all about skits and being silly and jumping in Lake Nineveh and all that fun stuff, and to rest ourselves. And during that time, the kids will be introduced to the long trip options. Our trips coordinator will let them know what the choices are going to be and how many people can be on each trip. And they'll have an opportunity to sign up for some of their favorite choices. I think they get to choose 3 that sound really cool to them. And then they'll be split up into different groups. So they won't be with just their cabin mates. They'll be with a combination of people. And so you'll get to know a whole different group of your campmates. And this will be going out for a 6-day trip where we could be anywhere around New England. And I don't know if you know much about the geography here, but we are right in the beautiful Green Mountains. We're very close to the White Mountains. You go up north, we've got gorgeous rivers and mountains up in Maine. And we have lots of well-worn paths through all those places where kids will see incredible views, and they'll hike hard elevations and maybe even float a river. You know, we'll see what we have on deck for this summer, but there's lots of cool options that they can get into.
So it sounds like a really robust trip system that allows kids to really push themselves. What about when they're in camp, right? And having those rest periods in between their trips? What does that look like for kids?
Yeah, I really love the balance of SAM Camp programming in that there's always a lot going on and like a lot to explore and dive into, but it's also a little bit of a slower pace than lots of traditional summer camps where, you know, maybe you're squeezing in 5 activities a day and an evening program and you got 1 hour to rest and that's about it. The pace of the day at SAM is a little bit more spread out. We have a silent meeting. We have lots of time for singing, and we have 3 activity periods of varying lengths so that we can, you know, fit more in-depth activity periods in and not feel rushed. And we can do little one-off fun things and not feel like it's dragging on forever. And kids have a lot of choice over what they participate in day to day. There'll always be some kind of run around silly game option. There'll always be something creative to do. We'll have open waterfront every afternoon, weather permitting, and they get to choose, like usually just the night before, what they want to sign up for and participate in based on what they're feeling and interested in as they go through their camp time.
That's so great. How's the food at SAM Camp?
I've heard it's incredible. I recently met our longtime head chef, Sam Arfer, who is so passionate about his work and loves SAM Camp dearly. And from what I hear, he's an incredible cook with great recipes. It's very important to him that every kid at camp and counselor feels well fed and nourished. He loves to explore lots of different kinds of food to help sort of expand campers' palates and try new things, since we're already trying all kinds of new things at camp. But he also knows that, you know, sometimes you just need mac and cheese, and that's great too. So I think he rides that line really well in terms of menu planning. And one thing I really love about Farm and Wilderness is that the values show up in how we do food too. So, you know, a lot of our food comes from our gardens and our barn. A lot of our food is organic or purchased locally. There's just a lot of thought and care and personalization put into what our head chefs do. And we in particular have a really good one.
Y'all really do. And while I'm really proud of kind of my kitchen, Sam Arfer is an institution for Farm Wilderness. And so
yes,
having him there, having him do the incredible food, it's great for SAM Camp, great for Farm and Wilderness, and a differentiator for us from other camps. Like, we really do put care into the food. It's a part of our programming. It's a part of our ethos, which is great. So we have families who are listening to this who might have already signed up for SAM Camp, or some who are thinking about signing up for SAM Camp. We also will be having former staff, former campers, people who care a lot about SAM Camp listening to this. And I was part of the interview process. I am very happy you are joining us. And I think you are incredibly qualified to shepherd this community in the coming years. And I know that one of the concerns I want to lift up and have you speak a little bit on is for families who've looked at SAM a few years and just, gosh, there's been a lot of director change. Like, what does that mean? Right. And so for families who are wondering about that, or former alumni or former campers or things like that, what do you want to say to them for them to make sure and feel like SAM Camp is being held?
Well, I think the whole world has really been uprooted in the last 3 years with COVID and everything that brought with us. It wasn't just SAM Camp, you know, that's been through these endless changes. The whole world has. And I think especially after Jeff leaving, having held Sam for so many years, it was hard to find the right person to really fill those shoes and carry forward that legacy. And I'm so, so grateful to both Miles and Sarah for what they gave in the year that they each ran Sam Camp. And having spoken to both of them, I know that they were and remain really passionate about that community and what it does for kids. And, sometimes it takes some trial and error, and, you might think something's going to be right, and then life circumstances change and you figure out it's not. For me, I feel so, so blessed to be the next person in this line of opportunity to serve these kids and to be part of this community that's been a safe and special place for a very long time. And, to be a little bit vulnerable about it, I've never felt so drawn to a role or to a community. And I feel like this opportunity in particular touches different parts of my heart and my passions in a way that no other job offering ever has for me. And I'm at a place in my life with my family and with my young baby where, we are really craving some roots and some consistency over several years. And I've learned so much about how camps run and what it takes to keep a camp growing, not just in like numbers and income or whatever, but growing in its mission, growing in the depth of what it's actually trying to achieve. And I know that to really do that right and to maximize the potential of such a special place like this, it takes a few years of observing and building relationships with people, both with kids and families and also staff members who organize their lives around coming back year after year. And I hold that as a huge responsibility, but also as a really amazing opportunity. And being at a time when so much has changed for Sam Camp over the last several years, I feel like it's opened this really cool door of potential where there's so many different ways we could go with it. Like there's so many ways that we can grow this thing together. And I really hope I get to be a part of that for a long time.
That's really incredible to hear. And again, I'm glad that you are joining us. You have only been here a few weeks. So I'm going to ask you a question I've asked others who've been here much longer.
Okay.
What do you hope your legacy will be as a SAM director?
What a big question. First and foremost, I hope that I'm remembered as a community builder. I hope that both kids and staff members remember me as a person who really cared to get to know them as people and who was deeply invested in each individual's long-term growth. And I think that's something really beautiful about being part of a small, medium camp community. And on a somewhat lighter note, maybe just as far as programming, like I'm a musician and an artist, and I just want Sam Camp to be a place that people remember as just exploding with song and, paint and crayons everywhere. And I want it to be a place where people build some of the memories from their adolescence where they realize that they were strong, and that they want to come back to see more of that part of themselves. And I really want to facilitate those kinds of experiences.
I have no doubt that you are going to do that. And I'm so incredibly happy that you are our new SAM Camp director. I really want to appreciate you for coming on the podcast and spending some time with us today. And I really wish you the best of summers.
Oh, thank you so much. I can't wait.
That was my conversation with Adair, the amazing new director of Saltash Mountain Camp. If you'd like to register, apply for a job ad, or just learn more, check out farmandwilderness.org. You'll also find us on Instagram, we're on YouTube, and we're on TikTok, where we are featuring staff testimonials. This episode has been a part of our limited series for spring 2023. If you subscribe and leave us a good review, we might just be able to come back this fall. Thanks to our guest Adair, original music by Emmett Powers, recording and editing done by myself. Thanks to everyone at Farm and Wilderness who helped make our summers possible. Our camp vocabulary word for this episode comes from Sam Camp, and Sam Camp tends to have the longest pre-meal circle ups. One reason? The Spinnaker contest. The Spinnaker is a person. It's a role chosen in the circle before every meal. This person will lead the whole community from the hill to where they eat, and they decide how they're going to do that with some sort of silly walk. And the entire community has to match their walk when they're going to the meal. If you ever visit Sam Camp, you might get chosen, so make sure you have something pretty good ready. With that, remember, camp magic is real, y'all. Until next time.